A few days ago, the Reg H format was announced, with the main twist being absolutely no legendary Pokemon being allowed. So goodbye, Miraidon. Get out of here, Urshifu. Ogerpon, we had a good run, but it's time for you to get out. Oh, and also no Paradox Pokemon are going to be allowed either. So while I'm losing my pal Screamtail, at least that means there's no more Fluttermane, no more Raging Bolt, Iron Bundle, Iron Crown, anything that is a Paradox Pokemon, gone. At least until January when Reg G resumes. But what does that mean? Well, for starters, it means Reg H is going to be removing a lot of prevalent Pokemon from the format coming September, and it also means Electrode is now the fastest Pokemon in the format since there's no more Fluttermane or Iron Bundle to take advantage of their Paradox abilities, giving them absurd speed. And not to mention Regieleki is a legendary Pokemon, so it's also banned. Does that mean Electrode will be any good? Probably not. It is Electrode, but it might have some moves that might be worth looking into later. Also, it means Dragapult and Barraskewda are now the second and third fastest Pokemon in the format, so we might see some usage for them go up. We might not. We might. It's hard to say. As far as Reg H goes, I was going to talk about the winners and losers of the format, but technically, if you aren't a Legendary or Paradox one, you're already a winner since you're allowed in the format to begin with. So in that case, I wanted to talk about some Pokemon that we'll likely see, and then some not as likely to see, but some potential options to fill a niche role on your team. So let's hop into Showdown. I know what I just said about Electrode, but let's start off with Electrode since it is the fastest thing in the format. Both itself and its Hisuian counterparts do get access to Electroweb, so that could be a really good means of speed control. You slap a Focus Sash on this and you basically have a Diet Regieleki without the Transistor boosting up its electric type attacks, so you could start slowing some things down with Electroweb. And it also does get access to a very fast taunt. This thing does have base 150 speed, which means this thing does have the same speed stat as a Calyrex Shadow Rider, so just think about that for some context. We can have a fast taunt here, and then that way we can shut down some slower dark type Pokemon. Hypothetically, it could be really good for killing momentum by having a fast taunt hidden Incineroar, and then they just can't go for a parting shot into your partner. Electrode could be a fairly decent support option to help your team. Now, the interesting thing about Electrode and its Hisuian counterpart, though, is they do get some different support moves. The Cantonian version of Electrode gets access to Eerie Impulse, so you have a great means of cutting an opponent's special attack 2 stages with that. It also gets access to Helping Hand, which I think is kind of a little bit weird that only Electrode or Cantonian Electrode gets access to Helping Hand where the Hisuian variant doesn't, but basically you can power up your partner's attacks by a 50% boost with the Helping Hand, and then you also get access to Metal Sound on Electrode there too, so you do have a means of targeting your opponent's special defense and trying to reduce it 2 stages. And the reason why I say trying is it is an 85 accuracy move, so probably not the best move to put out there, but I figured I'd just mention it just in case you wanted to have that fast means of trying to soften something up. And Electrode does get access to both Rain Dance and Electric Terrain, so if you're maybe looking to play around a weather team or a terrain team, you could have access to something like that. Having the fast Rain Dance could be great for a water-type Pokemon. Palin is probably going to be coming back into the format, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but it could be a good means of setting up the brain for something like, say, Palafin or maybe a Quaquaval or a Azumarill. Now that Urshifu is not going to be allowed, having access to different water-type Pokemon is going to be very nice to consider, and if you want to use an Archaludon, having access to that Rain Dance could make it very, very handy, and then that way too you can just immediately fire your Electro Shot. And then if you wanted to have the Electric Terrain, this isn't going to be as prevalent since we're not going to be allowed to use the Violet Paradox Mons, but it does give you a power boost to electric type attacks, and it does mean that you can't be put to sleep. So because Miraidon and its Hadron engine are not going to be allowed, the Electric Terrain won't be as prevalent, but that means Amoonguss might see a uprising in usage. So if you don't want Amoonguss to put you to sleep with Spore, you could go for Electric Terrain on Electrode, and then that way you don't have to worry about Spore. It's a very, very niche situation, don't get me wrong, but you could make the case for running the electric terrain on Cantonian Electrode. Back when Scarlet and Violet first came out, this was something I tried out on one of my first battle teams, so I do have a little bit of a soft spot for Cantonian Electrode. Then as far as Hisuian Electrode goes, the main difference here is it has a whole other secondary typing. So this thing is electric grass, so it does technically have a few more weaknesses than Cantonian Electrode, but it does get access to some grass type support moves as well as grass type damaging moves. As far as grass type attacks go for damage, we get access to grass knots, so the heavier the target is, the more power this move has. We get access to, we'll just change over that filter right quick. We get access to Energy Ball, which is a respectable base 90 power move. We have access to Giga Drain, and we do have Leaf Storm. Honestly, out of the moves here for Hisuian Electrode, I think Leaf Storm would probably be one of the better grass type options to have, since you can hit ground types for super effective damage. You can technically run grassy terrain on Hisuian Electrode as well, and then maybe say, for example, if you're playing like say a Swords Dance Rillaboom, you could reset the grassy terrain for it when the grassy terrain wears off, and now you can go for more priority grassy glides. You could have that as a supportive option. You could also play along with a substitute Leech Seed set, and then that way Electrode is fast. It can get the Leech Seed up, and then it can just start to whittle down your opponents a little bit, and it can hide behind a substitute. So if you have a redirection setter next to Hisuian Electrode, you get your substitute, you get the Leech Seeds up, and then Electrode can just try to go from there, and then just have the substitute take damage for it, while Leech Seed restores a little bit more of its HP at the end of the turn. And another thing too is, if you're worried about, say, your opponent's abilities, you could use Worry Seed. Worry Seed changes the target's ability to Insomnia, which means if your opponent is relying on, say, something like an Unaware Dondozo, you can hit them with a Worry Seed, change Unaware into Insomnia, and now they can't be put to sleep because of Insomnia, but their original ability is now overwritten. And if you're really concerned about Spore as well, what you could do is you could even just side a Worry Seed your own Pokemon, especially if it's an ability that's not really getting you much out of it. You could just go for that Worry Seed, override it, gain Insomnia, and now your opposing Amoonguss can't put you to sleep. So that could be something really nice. And one other thing too, to tie it back into both forms of Electrode, if you wanted to, you could run Volt Switch on them to be able to pivot in and out. So that's mainly Electrode in a nutshell. Let's talk about some of the actual heavy hitting Pokemon and then get into some support Pokemon. So let's jump right on into the next one, which is the poster child of the format, Ursaluna Blood Moon. I'm really not exaggerating too when I say Ursaluna Blood Moon is the poster child for this format, because it's literally in the promo art on home for the Reg H format, both itself and Dragonite. And with the likes of Iron Hands and Urshifu being banned this format, that's two heavy-hitting fighting-type Pokemon that threaten this thing just gone. And plus, a lot of restricted legendary Pokemon have been going toe-to-toe with Ursaluna Blood Moon. This thing has been incredibly prevalent into the format since it was introduced in the Teal Mask, and it has been able to keep up in a single restricted format. So now that it's going into a non-restricted format, Ursaluna Blood Moon should be able to do a lot of damage. Life Orb is a great item on it since it gives you that immediate power boost, and Blood Moon and Hyper Voice don't have to worry about ghost types being immune to them thanks to the ability of Ursaluna's Mind's Eye. And having a ground type stab is great on this thing since it's able to hit rock and steel type Pokemon for super effective damage, since they would otherwise be able to resist a Terra Normal boosted Hyper Voice or Blood Moon for that matter. So Ursaluna Blood Moon, if left unchecked, is going to be incredibly prominent within this format. Now, one good way of getting around this thing is the fact that it only has a base 65 special defense. So if you can hit this thing hard on the special side, you should be able to get it off the field relatively quick. And if you're using this, it's definitely going to be very nice to have something like, say, Clefairy with Friend Guard or Mousehold with Friend Guard and Redirection to try to pull away some non-spread moves so you can preserve it. And if you see a special attacking Pokemon hit the field, you might want to focus on a little bit of defense with Ursaluna's partner while Ursaluna tries to get them off of the field. Now, alternatively to a Life Orb, you could also run a Throat Spray, and then that way too, Hyper Voice will give you a special attack boost after you go for that Throat Spray, and then your attacks are going to just hit all the harder. So that could be relatively nice. And some other things, too, to keep in mind, too, is Ursaluna does get access to some other moves. The main thing is Blood Moon, Hyper Voice, and Earth Power are the most common, but it does get access to Moonblast, so it does have some good Fairy-type coverage to hitting Fighting-type and Dark-type Pokemon, and it also gets access to Vacuum Wave, so this is a nice priority move since it is a special attack, and it's also a special Fighting-type attack at that, so having Vacuum Wave on Ursaluna wouldn't be the worst thing imaginable, and if you wanted to try to patch up your special defense as well, you could also put on an Assault Vest, and then that way too you get a 50% boost to your special defense. So now you're gonna get a little bit bulkier on the specially defensive side. It could try to throw your opponents for a little bit of a loop too. Assault Vest Ursaluna shouldn't be underestimated by any means either. With the likes of Urshifu, Rapid Strike, Raging Bolt, and Miraidon now being banned for the Regulation H format, we might see a return for Palin. Palin in its hero form has a base 160 attack stat, which is just absolutely monstrous. The main catch, though, is in order to achieve the hero form, you have to send Palin out into battle in its zero form and then switch it out in order for it to change. There's just something about it that's just a little bit subconscious about changing in front of everyone. But once you get that hero form Palin set up, this thing will be able to do some major damage. As far as its stats go, it has a 160 attack, as I just mentioned. It's also got 97 defense and 87 special defense, which is a 25-point increase compared to its zero form. Zero form Palin has something along the lines of 72 defense and 62 special defense, so the fact that it gets to switch out does mean it does get that nice big stat bonus. The biggest change is its attack stat, because its attack stat is under 100 before it switches out, and honestly the only two stats that stay the absolute same is its HP at 100 and its speed at 100. So once you get Palin transformed, you can do some major damage. And part of the reason too why we saw this thing drop off in the first place was Urshifu was able to just threaten immediate damage with Surging Strikes, and Rillaboom with getting Grassy Glide back was also a big nail in the Palin coffin. But there might be some life left in this Dolphin hero, because now that a lot of the biggest threats to it are gone, such as Raging Bolt with Thunderclap and Miraidon, we might be able to see a resurgence. Having just Rillaboom as a decent check to Palin is a lot more manageable than a bunch of the other Pokemon, since we could pair this thing with an Incineroar, and then that way too, we could send out Palin in zero form, and if our opponent leads Rillaboom, well, we could just switch into an Incineroar, we get an Intimidate drop into Rillaboom, and Incineroar could go for a Parting Shot or a Flare Blitz. If it goes for Flare Blitz and knocks out Rillaboom, great. Whatever comes in to replace Rillaboom might knock out Incineroar, or Incineroar can follow up with a Parting Shot into that Pokemon. Or if Rillaboom doesn't go down and they switch out, well, we can always Parting Shot away with Incineroar to preserve it with its Fake Out and its Flare Blitz for the Rillaboom, and Palin can come back in. Incineroar is not exactly the fastest Pokemon out there, so it will be a slow Parting Shot, which means Palin will get in relatively safely. As far as water type attacks go, Palin does get Wave Crash, which is a great base 120 powered move. If this thing gets powered up with Rain Dance or Terra Water, it's going to do some major damage. If you wanted to, you could run a Life Orb or a Choice Band on it as well to further boost up its power. It also gets its own signature move in the form of Jet Punch, which is basically a stronger Aqua Jet. It's base 60 power, and it's also still a priority of 1, so moves like Extreme Speed will still outspeed it, but there is something nice about having that priority of 1 on the Jet Punch, because you could also get a Helping Hand off before the Jet Punch, and then the Jet Punch will do even more damage. And if you wanted to too, you could look into a bulky Palin variant, which is kind of why my EVs are all over the place on screen here, because I was thinking you could invest heavily into the HP to bring it up to 205. With 156 points into an adamant nature, you hit 220, and then I just kind of divvied up the rest into the defense and special defense to bring us up to 124 on the physical defense and 114 onto the special defense, and with an assault vest giving us a 50% boost to that special defense, it's going to be incredibly tanky, and the remaining points into the speed is just make sure we're not wasting EVs, so we have 122 onto the speed front right there, and keep that number in mind for later. So that's mainly my thoughts on Palin in a nutshell. Let's jump on into the next one, which is one of my personal favorites, Annihilate. So whether you're playing a bulky Rage Fist set or a choice banded close combat set, Annihilate has the potential to do some major damage to a lot of Pokemon, and this thing is a great potential Incineroar counter since we have the Defiant ability, which means if Incineroar comes in and hits us with the Intimidate, well, by the time everything is said and done, we're looking at a +1 attack boost right there thanks to Defiant. We can threaten the Incineroar with a boosted Drain Punch or a close combat depending on what kind of a set we're running, and we can get major HP back if we are running the Drain Punch if this is in the middle of a battle. Now, the other thing too that's really nice about Annihilate is it is a ghost type as well, so it is naturally immune to Fake Out, which means Incineroar really can't slow this thing's momentum down, and it definitely does not want to consider running a Parting Shot into this thing, since that would give it even more attack power thanks to Defiant. And the fact that we're a ghost type means we can have a nice positive matchup into Riolu, since Riolu does like to run Fake Out as well. One thing that I really like about Annihilate is you could run potentially Terra Fire or Terra Grass, and then Annihilate doesn't have to worry about getting either burned or put to sleep. If you're running Terra Fire as well, you could slap a safety goggles on this thing to get the best of both worlds, and then you don't have to worry about Spore as well, since the Rage Powder or the safety goggles would nullify Spore as well as Rage Powder redirection from the likes of, say, Amoonguss. But whereas I did just mention Palin, it's probably a good idea to keep in mind that Terra Grass or Terra Water will make it so that you're not becoming weak to Palin's water type attacks, unlike Terra Fire. So definitely some food for thought as far as some Terra options go. And Annihilate does have the potential to get really bulky. If you want to go heavy into your HP, like maybe say about 220 EVs into your HP, you hit 213, you can run an Adamant Nature onto this thing, and then say 156 will put you up to 170, and then you can start divvying up your points into your speed and your defenses. So if you go up by 12 EVs, that brings you up to 112 into your speed, and then you can invest the rest into your special defense with a little bit into your physical defense, since you do have the means of running Bulk Up on a Drain Punch set. So maybe you go an extra 2 points into your defense, have that Bulk Up, put 108 EVs into your special defense, so you hit 124, and then Bulk Up just kind of patches up that physical defense, while the EVs are going to focus a little bit more on the specially defensive side. And as far as your fourth move goes, you could run Protect on a Bulk Up set if you really wanted to, or you could go for another coverage option as well. Annihilate does get access to Fire Punch, so that could be a means of hitting some bulkier grass types for some super effective damage. If you wanted to hit fairies and threaten them for immediate damage, you could run a Gunk Shot at the risk of running an 80 accuracy move, or alternatively you could run Poison Jab to trade a little bit of power for accuracy, go down from 120 to 80, and then have an increase in accuracy from 80 to 100. So you could have that. Ice Punch is not too bad for hitting flying types as well. And then what you could also do too is, if you wanted to, you could run more speed investment into Annihilate. Maybe even consider running a Jolly Nature here, and then that way you can get some speed into this thing, and then you can increase your attack just a little bit further, and then you can slap a choice item of choice, whether it's a choice band or a choice scarf. You can get a 50% boost into either your attack or your speed. And then instead of maybe say running Rage Fist and Drain Punch as your damaging options, you could run Close Combat. A Bandit Close Combat will dent a lot of things, since that's a base 120 stab option. Rage Fist you could technically keep, and then that way if you do come in and take a little bit of chip, Rage Fist will still benefit from its power increase, but alternatively, you could run Shadow Claw instead. And then that way, it's not going to have the potential damage increase like Rage Fist, but it is consistent damage. You could run U-Turn, and then this way you can switch out and reset your move, since the choice item would lock you into something. And then for your last move, you could pick one of those coverage options. Or what you could do too is, if you're running a Scarf and only a Scarf, don't run this on a choice band, you could run Final Gambit, and then that way too, Annihilate will basically take itself out, but at the cost of doing the exact amount of HP it has into a target. So if your opponent's got like a really bulky Pokemon on their side of the field, maybe what you do is, instead of running attack investment, you run more speed investment as well as HP. Get your HP up potentially as high as it goes, which is 217. Not a lot of Pokemon appreciate losing 217 HP points immediately, but you could go for a Final Gambit choice Scarf, Annihilate, and then that way you can just trade your Annihilate for something that might threaten the rest of your team. So it could be the hero that you need at the end of the day. So that's another option as well. So on to Blood Moon's fellow poster child, we're now talking about Dragonite. Dragonite can threaten a lot of Pokemon with its combination of Inner Focus, protecting it from Intimidate and Flinching, along with Terra Normal boosted extreme speeds to just dent a lot of things. And not a lot of Pokemon really appreciate taking a +2 priority Terra Normal boosted extreme speed, especially since if you wanted to lower this thing's attack, you can't really use Intimidate, which is one of the best means of dealing with physical attackers to begin with. Now, alternatively too, you could still burn it, but you gotta be able to take that extreme speed first, and not a lot of Pokemon do appreciate that. Now, as far as Dragonite goes, it does lose access to having Chien-Pao, which is arguably one of its best partners, since Sword of Ruin does lower the defense of everything on the field, so extreme speed isn't going to quite hit as hard, but you could still slap a choice band on Dragonite for its item, or you could run a Dragon Dance set. Both means of boosting power do come with their advantages. If you go for the choice band, well, you could run 4 damaging moves in that case, and then all of them get a 50% boost to their damage output. Whereas with Dragon Dance, if you wanted to run Dragon Dance, you are costing Dragonite one of its move slots, but you are increasing its speed for its non-extreme speed moves, which could be good at the end of the day. If you wanted to, you could run Choice Band Extreme Speed alongside maybe Dragon Claw, and then you could have Aerial Ace for some flying type damage. Now, technically, you really wouldn't want to run Aerial Ace for the sake of running Aerial Ace, but it is a stab move off of Dragonite that does benefit from the fact that it cannot miss, so it does kind of come with its own perks, especially if you have an alternative means of raising Dragonite's attack. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but Aerial Ace you could technically run, and then you could have another coverage move on Dragonite with a choice band, like say maybe Ice Spinner, and then that way you do have a means of destroying terrain. Maybe your opponent's got an Indeedee on the field, and you want to just make sure you can set yourself up to hit things later on with the extreme speed. And the nice thing here is, if you were to use Ice Spinner and your opponent couldn't switch out and you still had a Pokemon in the back, you could then just reset Dragonite's item choice, or rather its move choice, with the choice band, go for the Ice Spinner, destroy the terrain, switch it out, and now you can come back in and go for more extreme speeds. That is an option. So Ice Spinner could be really nice for that, but you could also go for Stomping Tantrum, and then this way you can hit steel types which would otherwise resist the extreme speed. And plus, Stomping Tantrum, it's a single target ground type attack, so it's not like you have to worry about the likes of, say, Wide Guard, so you don't have to worry about that. And plus, you could also run, say, something like Earthquake if you're just not weary of spread moves coming your partner's way. You could run the choice banded Earthquake with Dragonite, and then just take advantage of the fact that it can do some major damage. So you could do something like that for a choice banded set. Now, if you were going to run, say, a Dragon Dance set instead, as far as your item goes, you could run a Life Orb, and then that way too, you still get a further damage increase to your moves, but you could also say maybe run a Lumberry, and then that way, if you do get burned or paralyzed, you don't have to worry about those status conditions for the first turn because the Lumberry will cure you, which means then your opponents have to hit you with whatever move they used in the first place to get that burn or paralysis. Now, if it's a Prankster Will-O-Wisp or a Prankster Thunderwave, yeah, they still can hit you, but now your opponent has to play the accuracy game again, and if, say, for example, maybe your opponent hit your Terranormal Dragonite with, say, a fire type attack and burned you, well, now they have to deal with the low odds of getting that burn a second time, so that could be nice. Now, another thing, too, that you could run as far as an item goes is you could run the safety goggles, and then this way you don't have to worry about Rage Powder redirecting attacks away. And if you're going to run a Dragon Dance set, I do really think a redirection Pokemon could be really nice, like, say, maybe Indeedee or Clefairy, especially Clefairy since it does have that Friend Guard, but if you're redirecting attacks away from Dragonite and you're getting that Dragon Dance off, well, now you're getting an attack boost and a speed boost, and now Dragonite can threaten things while being able to choose between its moves. So there is that, and with the Dragon Dance boosting up your attack, if you were technically running Aerial Ace, you could double your stab by going Terra Flying instead of Terra Normal just to throw your opponent for a loop. Like maybe they're prepared for the normal type Dragonite, but they might not necessarily be prepared for the Terra Flying Dragonite. So you could start doing some major damage to bulky Grass type Pokemon instead. Maybe they have like a bulky Ghost type Pokemon. If you go Terra Flying, well, Extreme Speed's not going to be doing you any favors, but now you can just bypass those Ghost types that are immune to Extreme Speed by hitting them with a heavy hitting Aerial Ace, or even just hitting them with a boosted Dragon Claw. Technically speaking, you could run Flying type Terra Blast, which would give you a little bit more firepower than the Aerial Ace, since Terra Blast does have that higher base power. But the one drawback there, though, is the fact that Terra Blast, unless you're Terastallized, is a special move. It only becomes a physical move when you're Terastallized and your attack stat is higher, so just some food for thought. Now, Dragonite can benefit from coaching as well, so that's another thing too. If you have, like, say, a coaching Pokemon on the field, you get that attack boost and your defense boost off of your coaching bond into Dragonite. Well, now Aerial Ace could also be another means of getting around, say, minimize Pokemon, and because you have that attack boost, great. Aerial Ace is just going to do even more damage. So let's move on to the next Pokemon, and that is going to be Metagross. And Metagross, I just want to see it do good. I was really excited for it when it came out with the Indigo Disc, and honestly, I still am excited for it, but Urshifu and Fluttermane, yeah, they just looked at Metagross and was like, no. Absolutely not. Urshifu with its access to Stab, Wicked Blow, and Sucker Punch, and then Fluttermane with Stab, Shadow Ball, just really put a damper on Metagross's parade, despite Steel Psychic being such a good defensive typing. But with them gone, I'm really hoping Metagross might be able to step up. A Life Orb could be a great item on this thing, especially since it does have the Clear Body ability, so we don't have to worry about running a Clear Amulet on it. So Life Orb could be really nice. A Terrain Seed, whether it be a Grassy or Psychic Seed, could be really nice on this thing to give it a defense or a special defense boost. And Assault Vest can be really nice. Psychic Fangs is a great utility stab option since it can destroy screens. Knockoff is a great utility move in the fact that it removes items from your opponents. So Metagross could potentially do a lot of damage. It's also only a 70 speed Pokemon, so you could technically run this either on or out of a Trick Room team. If you run it with Trick Room, you can run a Brave Nature to lower your speed, and if you have 0 IVs in your speed, the lowest you're hitting is 67, so you could technically do that. Or if you wanted to run it on a Tailwind team and run, say, maybe a Adamant Metagross, you're at 90. It doesn't take that much to boost up your speed to 100. Like, it only takes 76 EVs just to get up to 100. So if you want to run, maybe, say, a Jolly Metagross, 76 EVs puts you up to 110. You get yourself down to 107. At +1 speed, you're technically outspeeding Dragapult, so a Tailwind would definitely mean you're going to outspeed it, so you could have that. As far as Steel-type option moves go, you do have Iron Head, which is nice and reliable, but Metagross does get access to Heavy Slam, post DLC. So Metagross is a chunky spider here, so it can do some good damage with Heavy Slam, or you could use the new steel type attack, Hard Press. So basically, the more HP Metagross has, the more damage Hard Press is going to do. So there's plenty of options and opportunities for Metagross. I'm really excited to see this thing in Reg H, and I'm hoping it has a much better showing than it did in Regulation F and its non-existent presence in Reg G, for that matter. So, Metagross, I really just want to see it do good. Moving on, we've got Backscalibur, and honestly, I would love to see Bax in action. Backscalibur is definitely one of the cooler pseudo-legendary dragons, and the nice thing is, the pseudo-legendary Pokemon are not legendary, so they are still allowed in the format. So the nice thing here, too, is despite them being referred to as pseudo-legendaries, they aren't. But most of those Pokemon are dragon types, and since Backscalibur is part ice type, it should be able to threaten the majority of them. Like, non-pseudos like Tyranitar and Metagross aside, like, Backscalibur should be able to threaten most of these dragon type Pokemon. Now, Hisui and Goodra will probably put up the best fight against it since it's neutral to ice type attacks and it can set up its defense and clap back with Body Press, but Backscalibur with a loaded dice and Icicle Spear should be able to shred most of these opposing Dragon-type Pokemon if they don't terrestrialize away from their Ice-type weakness. And honestly, loaded dice, Icicle Spear, Backscalibur is just really entertaining to me. I mean, we have a base 145 attack stat, 87 speed is relatively nice because it doesn't take much EVs with a Jolly Nature to be able to outspeed Dragapult after one speed boost. If you want to run Scale Shot and lower your defense one stage, you can get a speed boost, and Scale Shot does benefit from the loaded dice as well. So technically speaking, you do have a more reliable dragon type attack than Dragon Claw, so you could benefit from that. And Backscalibur does get access to high horsepower, so there is a means of hitting steel type Pokemon which would otherwise resist the combination of ice and dragon for super effective damage. So you could boost up Backscalibur like that. You could also run Sword Stance to boost up your attack 2 stages, and then Scale Shot will continue to shred through opponents while giving you a speed boost. If you don't want to run Scale Shot or Sword Stance, you could run Dragon Dance too, and then that way you can increase your attack and speed at the same time. And then you could potentially run Dragon Claw on Bax, or you could even run its signature move of Glaive Rush. Now, Glaive Rush, you do have to be a little bit weary because it does have the unfortunate side effect of making sure that Backscalibur takes double the damage when it does get hit after it uses Glaive Rush until the end of the next turn. So a little bit unfortunate, but Glaive Rush does have that base 120 power right there. So if you play your cards right and keep Backscalibur safe, I don't see why you can't run it. Like, Glaive Rush would definitely be nice. And on top of that, you don't necessarily have to run the loaded dice as much as I love that item. You could run an Assault Vest, and then Backscalibur can get relatively tanky. And the other thing to keep in mind too is this thing can't get burned. So that's going to be really handy. Like, Thermal Exchange makes sure that Backscalibur cannot be burned. You do still take a little bit of damage from fire-type attacks, but if you terrestrialize into a fire-resistant type, Backscalibur is not going to be taking much damage from fire-type attacks. There's a lot of special fire-type attacks compared to physical fire-type attacks, so you can take a fire-type attack relatively comfortably, get an attack boost, and then threaten back with either Glaive Rush or high horsepower. You wouldn't want to necessarily throw an ice-type attack at a fire-type Pokemon, but you could throw it at your fire-type partner, like your opponent's fire-type's partner. A little bit of a weird sentence, but anyways, you could do that. Like, maybe it's, say, an Incineroar on Rillaboom, you could throw the ice-type attack at Rillaboom. And if you are running an Assault Vest set instead of a loaded dice, you can change Icicle Spear out for Icicle Crash. Now, the nice thing here too is Icicle Crash does have a 30% chance to make the target flinch, so there is that. And one of those fire resistant types that you could consider for terrestrializing is Dragon, so right there you would also double up on your Dragon type stab, so you would be able to do a lot of damage. You could go Terra Water, which is something that I really liked, and because Raging Bolt and Thunderclap were a problem, that's also why I kind of stopped running Terra Water backs, but now that they're gone, it could be worth it. So there is that. And another Terra that you could run that is resistant to fire that could be really nice is actually fire itself. So you could run Terra Fire, then have Terra Blast on there, and then that way you do have a other means of hitting steel type Pokemon. So Backscalibur looks really promising going into Regulation H. And speaking of other pseudo legendary Pokemon, I think Tyranitar is going to be really nice. So Tyranitar here, the nice big thing here is Koraidon, Kyogre, and Groudon, they're all banned. They're all prominent weather setters for both sun and rain. So we might see an uprise in sand make a resurgence, because we do see Alola Ninetales with snow. We might see Tyranitar bring sand teams a little bit of resurgence now that 3 major restricted Pokemon that bring the weather themselves are now gone. Now, sun and rain are still going to be fairly prominent in the forms of Politoed, Pelipper, and Torkoal, and Ninetales. I always forget about Cantonia Ninetales, but yeah. The big thing is sun and rain and snow, they're still going to be fairly prevalent, but now we might be able to see the playing field be a little bit more even for sand. So that's a really nice thing about Tyranitar. We can see, technically Hippowdon too, but we can see the sand come back. And the nice thing here too is with Tyranitar, Tyranitar is a rock type, so any rock type Pokemon also get a 50% special defense boost in the sand. So long as you don't terrestrialize away from your rock typing, you are going to have that natural built-in Assault Vest while the sand is still active. Tyranitar has got a base 100 special defense stat to begin with, so you're effectively looking at a base 150 special defense stat with the sand. If you want the double dip, you could put an Assault Vest on this thing as well. You could also have a Lumberry as your potential item of choice, and then that way you don't have to worry about Tyranitar potentially getting burned. Tyranitar also, post DLC, did get access to Stab knockoff, which is great since it's going to naturally get the benefits of being a dark type used by a dark type Pokemon, and it still gets that 50% modifier when it does remove items from the target. So knockoff is going to do a lot of damage. You can also have access to Stab Rock Slide, which is relatively nice. Tyranitar is not the fastest Pokemon out there, so you could potentially run Curse, and then if you're running Curse, you could raise your attack and defense 1 stage at the cost of lowering your speed. So hypothetically speaking, you could play this to a Trick Room set. If you wanted to, you would get relatively slower. If you had, say, a Brave Tyranitar with 0 IVs into your speed, you're hitting 59 points, which is roughly a little bit faster than Ursa Luna Blood Moon outside of Trick Room, so you're not that far behind it. And having the Assault Vest and Sand, either of those or both of them benefiting Tyranitar's special defense, means you should be able to not immediately get blown up by an Earth Power from Blood Moon. So having one of those boosts could be relatively nice. If you're not running an Assault Vest and you're running a Curse set and the Sand's still up, great. You should be able to take an Earth Power and get slower than Ursa Luna, so you could hit it back. Tyranitar does get access to fighting type moves as well, so you could potentially hit it for super effective damage. It also gets Body Press too, so if you're going for Curse, you are boosting up your defense stats, so you could hypothetically run Body Press instead, but you could run, say, Low Kick. So Low Kick will do more damage based off of how heavy the target is. You could also have Brick Break to destroy screens, so you could have that. But honestly, out of these fighting type options that Tyranitar does get, I think Body Press is probably the best looking one. Now, alternatively to Curse, you could also run Dragon Dance. Like I said, its speed is not the fastest out there, but a lot of the faster Pokemon that were cut were legendary Pokemon, so the overall speed game might change just a little bit, so you might be able to make a case for Dragon Dance Tyranitar. Like, if you run a Jolly Tyranitar with max IVs into your speed, you're naturally sitting at 89. Like, it's not going to take much to hit that 107 benchmark. Like, 132 speed EVs right there puts you to 130 or 107. So you could potentially get Tyranitar set up relatively quickly with a Dragon Dance and then start going for Rock Slides for some big damage. You could go for the knockoffs as well, so you could have that. Or alternatively too, you could play the supportive route with Tyranitar, which feels a little bit weird saying for a monster like Tyranitar with a base 134 attack stat, but this thing does get access to both Thunder Wave and Helping Hand. So Thunder Wave could be really nice for slowing down your opponent's momentum, especially if they miss the turn from paralysis. And then Helping Hand is huge because you can also boost up your allies' moves. And where there's Tyranitar, there's typically Excadrill. So here's the thing, like, if you have sand on the field, Excadrill can come in and Tyranitar can just give it explosive damage right out of the gate, especially if you, say, maybe want to run a Life Orb on it. You could have Excadrill get that Helping Hand boost from Tyranitar, and now each of its moves are getting that 50% boost. Or, hypothetically, you could lead Excadrill and, say, maybe Indeedee. You go for a Follow Me off of Indeedee, you click Swords Dance with Excadrill, switch Indeedee out if Indeedee survives, or if Indeedee goes down, even better, because then Tyranitar just comes in for free, and then you can click a move with Tyranitar as well. Like, basically, as soon as Excadrill came into existence, it met Tyranitar, gave it a friendship bracelet, and the two have been besties ever since. So you get that you get that high horsepower or that Iron Head going, especially if you have a +2 attack into Excadrill off of maybe a Swords Dance, and Excadrill is going to start doing some major damage. You could potentially run a Clear Amulet too, and then that way you don't have to worry about the likes of Intimidate. Or the other thing too is Helping Hand does have a higher priority than Fake Out. So you could get around Fake Out by running either Terra Ghost on Excadrill, or you could run a Covert Cloak. If you run the Covert Cloak, great, you're still going to take the Fake Out, but that'll protect you from flinching. But if you wanted to get really spicy about it, you run that Life Orb, you put the Terra Ghost on Excadrill, you Terrastalize, now you're dropping your fighting weakness as well, and becoming immune to Fake Out. I'm fairly certain Sandrush still keeps your immunity to Sandstorm chip damage, so you don't even have to worry about Terrastalizing away from the ground Steel typing with Excadrill. You get that Helping Hand boost, you have the Life Orb boost, and then Excadrill's just taking names and knocking things out left, right, and center. So there's that at the end of the day as well. So I can really see Excadrill and Tyranitar having a resurgence together as well. We're technically hip out on Excadrill as well, but let's be honest, we're probably seeing Tyranitar over hip out on if Sand is going to make a comeback in this format. Okay, now I'm getting into the good stuff because Riolu is hilarious support. It's a prankster Pokemon. It gets coaching, it gets upper hand, and it gets feint. So almost all of these Pokemon, with the exception of Electrode and Ursaluna, Ursaluna Blood Moon for that matter, all of them get the benefit of coaching. Tyranitar, Excadrill, Palafin, all of them love getting that +1 attack and defense boost. And then there's also the combination of Dragonite Riolu that was going around in Reg F, where you would run a Terra Normal, Inner Focus Dragonite, holding a weakness policy, going for extreme speed, while Riolu would go for upper hand. Upper hand would hit the Dragonite with its +3 priority, meaning it would bypass the extreme speed, hit Dragonite, activate the weakness policy, and then Dragonite would just absolutely obliterate whatever it was going to hit with the extreme speed, because Inner Focus would cancel out upper hand's flinch. So that's coming back. That's going to be fun. Honestly, I really like the idea of Riolu here because Riolu does also have access to Feint. So unless your opponent is running a Ghost type Pokemon or a Ghost Terra, they can't protect in the face of Riolu, since Riolu can hit them with the Feint, bypass the protect and remove it, while also potentially breaking a Focus Sash. And this gets incredibly scary too, because if your opponent underestimates the Riolu and leaves it alone, then Riolu just can continue to go for coachings or the upper hand setup for Dragonite. Or the other thing too is if you run a Covert Cloak on Riolu, that will protect you from Fake Out right there. Or you could hypothetically run Terra Ghost and a Focus Sash instead, but that's the wild thing about Riolu. Like, if you run a Focus Sash on Riolu and they don't hit you with a multi-hitting move, or they just don't double up on Riolu, well, whatever Pokemon that Riolu is looking to boost up is free to do whatever it wants, especially if it's already received a coaching boost from Riolu. So That's going to be fun. And remember what I had on screen for the Palafin? I had specifically 12 EVs to put it to 122. Well, a Adamant Palafin with 12 EVs hitting 122 is slower than a max speed Jolly Riolu at 123, which means you can go for the coaching with Riolu, and then Palafin can go for the Jet Punch and just get that benefit from having the attack boost from the coaching and hit them even harder. So you're welcome. That's Riolu basically in a nutshell right there. So Riolu's not the only pre-evolved Pokemon that I do have on this list. In fact, the last three Pokemon on this list are right there with Porygon II, Dusclops, and Merro. I think all three of these Pokemon could see a resurgence of usage. Porygon II has always been great. It's a very, very bulky Pokemon with base 85 HP, which means when you have max investment into that, it does have a 192, and alongside the Eviolite giving it a 50% boost to its base 90 and 95 defensive stats right there, this thing gets incredibly tanky. And Porygon 2 can also play either defensively or offensively, but regardless of which, Porygon is an incredible Trick Room setter, which means this thing can either be Blood Moon's best friend or its worst enemy. In Generation 8, Porygon 2 had the potential to win games all on its own, thanks to the fact that this thing is just so incredibly bulky. Now, one thing that kind of does work against it for Gen 9 is the Recover nerf, since most recovery moves did have their PP cut. But at the end of the day, Recover is going to make sure this thing does stay annoying and difficult to deal with. So one thing that you should keep in mind too is Porygon's ability Download. Download gives Porygon either an attack or special attack boost depending on the defensive stats of the Pokemon directly across the field from it. If the target has a lower defense stat than its special defense stat, Porygon 2 gets an attack boost, but if the special defense is lower than the defense, Porygon 2 gets a special attack boost. And special attack boosted Porygon 2 is very scary at the end of the day, because despite how much investment you do run into a Porygon 2, this is a base 105 special attack Pokemon. So if you get that right download boost, you could potentially do a lot of damage. Porygon 2 can be a great Terra candidate. I've seen Terra Poison do a lot of damage to things, but technically speaking too, you could potentially consider Terra Stellar, and then that way, if you're running a more offensively geared Porygon 2, all of Porygon 2's coverage moves does get a 20% boost in damage, so that could be very strong. And if you're worried about Porygon 2, just a little bit of a PSA here, for your EV spreads, especially for Pokemon that have very similar defensive stats, especially if they have the exact number, it's best to raise your special defense literally a point higher than the defense stat, and then that way Porygon 2, if it's on the field in front of that Pokemon, it'll get the attack boost, which the attack boost won't be nearly as drastic to deal with compared to a special attack boost. So that's going to be something to keep in mind. Now, Porygon 2 does get access to Eerie Impulse, so this could be a great means of dealing with special attackers, since it does cut their special attack 2 stages, so that could be relatively handy. Or on an offensively geared Porygon, what you could potentially see is, say, maybe Terra Blast and Ice Beam, and then depending on what your Terra is, Terra Blast will maintain its stab option, since it will then turn to whatever your Terra type is, so you'll still have stab on that. Ice Beam is just nice in general, since it can hit grass type Pokemon for some decent damage. It can hit flying type Pokemon and ground type as well. Or what you might even see too, instead of, say, Terra Blast, is maybe Thunderbolt and Ice Beam, and then this way too, the combination of electric and ice just hits a lot of Pokemon for some major damage. And one thing about Ice Beam specifically is this could be a very good means of doing some decent damage to Ursa Luna Blood Moon, so that could be really handy with Porygon. As far as the stat breakdown goes that I have for the EVs here, this is to try to make Porygon like as annoying as possible for Ursa Luna to deal with the max HP investment to bring us up to 192 and the 140 EVs into Porygon's special defense. With a calm nature, we hit 146. This is very handy for Two reasons. One, it means Ursa Luna can't pick up a KO. It cannot one-shot us with a Blood Moon, even when Terra normal, which means since Blood Moon can't fire consecutively, you could recover off the damage, or Porygon could go for some damage back into the Blood Moon, especially if Trick Room is up on the field. You could be able to do that, or alternatively too, Hyper Voice won't be able to deal with Porygon since it's a spread move and it is going to have its power slightly reduced in a double battle, so you can still recover off the damage, and Porygon could hit the Ursa Luna for a Eerie Impulse, which would then further lower its damage output. So there is that. Now the big weakness to nearly taking out the setup here, but anyways, the main weakness for Porygon is that it does suffer from 4 move slot syndrome, so you can only cram the 4 moves onto this thing. So when you're looking at building a Porygon, you might want to consider whether you want to play defensively or offensively. And if you're on the flip side of this and you're a little bit concerned about Porygon 2, one of the best ways of dealing with it is to hit it with a knockoff, remove that Eviolite, and then it becomes significantly easier to deal with at the end of the day. And similarly enough, when we get on to talking about Dusclops, same idea. If you hit it with a knockoff and get rid of that Eviolite, it's going to become a lot more manageable. So that's the main thoughts on Porygon 2, and let's jump right into Dusclops. Dusclops, like Porygon 2, is a great Trick Room setter. It's got 130 into both of its defenses, so the Eviolite's giving it an extra 50% boost, so you're effectively 195 in each of your defenses. Now, that's almost Shuckle tier defenses, which I definitely appreciate. Now, your HP, though, is also similar to Shuckle tier HP with base 40. Now, you are a little bit higher, but base 40 HP is not a lot of HP, so you're going to want to run max HP investment into your Dusclops here to bring it up to 147, and then just decide between which of your defenses you want to break your EVs into. I personally prefer a physically defensive Dusclops, especially since it does get Will-O-Wisp to burn physical attackers, but you could run specially defensive Dusclops. Since the defenses are even right now, you can see the bold 156 spread into the defense brings us up to 187. If you were to switch that with a Calm Nature, you would be at 187, with your defense then being 163. So that's relatively nice for Dusclops, and you do get access to Pain Split to whittle down your opponents too. Pain Split takes the HP stat of the target and the user, and then adds them together and then divvies it up evenly. So Dusclops can maintain its HP fairly frequently since its HP stat is so low to begin with, and you're just gradually wearing down your opponent. And if you have them burned, great. At the end of the turn, that target then loses a little bit more HP thanks to the burn. You also have a consistent damage output with Nightshade. Nightshade is a flat 50 damage because it does damage equal to the user's level. So in double battles on the ranked ladder, you're sitting at level 50 regardless, so you are getting that nice consistent 50 damage right there, so you have a rough idea of how long it will take to whittle down your opponent's HP, especially if you're pairing Nightshade and Pain Split together. But if you don't want to run that, you could technically run Shadow Sneak and take advantage of the fact that it is such a weak priority move. You could use this to, I don't know, maybe hit a Pokemon that might be holding a weakness policy to give them an attack boost, maybe a specific spider named Metagross. There is that, so like I said earlier about being able to run Metagross in Trick Room, you could get the Trick Room up and then just self-proc your own weakness policy with a Shadow Sneak off of Dusclops. And since it's not the hardest hitting move, you wouldn't be doing that much damage to a Metagross, so you would then get your weakness policy, and then Metagross could just do some major damage to things, especially if Metagross was, say, maybe running Psychic Fangs to destroy screens as well. Or, like I said, the knockoff, you could do some major damage with that. So just some food for thought for Dusclops. And also, I didn't realize this going into this video, but they committed a crime against Dusclops and they took away Bulldoze. I used to run Bulldoze on Dusclops next to Dialga, and I was hoping to be able to do the same thing about Metagross, but yeah, I'm a little bit salty about that. But anyways, moving on to the last Pokemon, and that is Merro. So we might see a resurgence in Merro because it just has such a great presence on the field for altering the flow of battle. This thing has great means of speed control. It can alter the field with Sunny Day and Rain Dance. It has Tailwind. It has Quash. Overall, Merro has a great kit for a prankster Pokemon. You can go for Prankster Thunder Waves to paralyze your opponents. As I mentioned too, this thing does have access to both Sunny Day and Rain Dance, so if you're playing with a Rain or Sun team, Merro might be your solution to Tornadus being banned, which could be relatively nice, and plus you do have access to Tailwind. As I mentioned too, you can increase the speed for the entire party for the 4 turns that Tailwind is active. You also have access to Haze, so if your opponent is playing with status boosts, like maybe say Dondozo, for example, they get that Tatsugiri, Merro just says nope, and just gets that Haze, and just all of those stat boosts that Tatsugiri gives Dondozo, gone. It's beautiful. And alternatively, too, if you're playing Golden Go next to your Merro and you go for Make It Rain a couple of times and lower your special attack, Merro can just say, I gotcha. Go for the Haze and resets the entire field back to 0, and then Golden Go can just go for more Make It Rains. So you could have that with Haze, but I think Quash is probably one of Merro's scarier moves, because maybe you're playing in a mirror matchup, or alternatively, you know either your opponent's Pokemon or your own can knock the other out, and maybe they might have the same base speed, or if you're in the mirror, you could definitely have a potential speed tie depending on what you're playing. And plus, Quash basically makes it so that the target is guaranteed to move last at the end of the turn. So maybe, for example, just hypothetically, you're playing Merro and Ursaluna Blood Moon against a opposing Ursaluna Blood Moon. Maybe you both have Tailwind on the field, or Trick Room is up on the field, meaning Tailwind is going to be useless to you, but you don't quite know if your opponent is running speed on their Ursaluna Blood Moon, or if they're min speed for the Trick Room optimization. You can just get around that with Quash. That would force the opposing Ursaluna Blood Moon to move last, and then you could potentially finish it off with a Blood Moon or Hyper Voice. As I mentioned when we were talking about Blood Moon, Ursaluna doesn't really have the highest special defense, so Ursaluna versus Ursaluna is a very scary matchup since they can do so much damage to the other, and Blood Moon is a base 140 powered move, so you could just ultimately remove the speed tie with Quash and then go for the finishing blow with the Blood Moon, especially too, like say maybe you both have Terra Normal, since that's the most Terra, or the most common Terra on Blood Moon for that matter, and then you just make them go last and you seal the deal and just send them straight to the end of the match with a loss. So that could be really nice for Quash right there. I really think Merro should play it. I think it's a very, very good move on Merro, and honestly, Sableye gets access to it as well, which means Sableye can just be equally scary as well. So hypothetically speaking, you could have plenty of fun with Quash, whether it be on a Merro or Sableye for that matter. Anyways, we've come to the end of the list. There's a lot of great Pokemon in the format. Obviously, I can't cover every single one. Otherwise, this video would probably be like 3 hours, which definitely not something I want to do because I still have to be a big boy and edit the video myself. So anyways, if there's a Pokemon that I missed, be sure to let me know down in the comments section below, and I will see you next time.